In today's Wild West story, a lone rancher saves a wounded woman trapped under a beam, only to discover a shocking secret that changes everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments below. Let's get started. The sun blazed like molten gold over the vast Texas plains, stretching endlessly into the horizon. The air shimmered with heat, and every breath tasted of dust and grit. Jacob Monroe wiped the sweat from his brow as he guided his horse along the northern fence line of his ranch. He was a man molded by hardship, broad-shouldered, weathered, and quiet, with eyes that had seen too much loss for his age. His father's death 2 winters ago had left him not only a ranch, but a burden that seemed heavier with each passing day. The land was dry, the cattle were thinning, and the debts were piling up. But Jacob was the kind of man who didn't quit, no matter how many times life tried to break him. He dismounted from his horse, dropped to one knee, and began inspecting a section of fence that had fallen. The wind carried the lonely sound of creaking boards, the kind of silence only the desert could make alive. He dug into the hard soil, planting the broken post back into place. His gloves were torn, his shirt clung to his skin, but he didn't care. Work was all he knew. Just as he was hammering the last nail, a sharp, echoing cry shattered the stillness. It wasn't the bellow of cattle or the call of a hawk. It was human. A woman's voice, faint but desperate. Jacob froze, his hammer still in hand, and listened. The cry came again, weaker this time, drifting across the canyon like a ghost. Without hesitation, Jacob grabbed his rifle from his saddle and swung up onto his horse. He rode hard, the pounding of hooves cutting through the empty land. He followed the sound down a rocky trail that led toward the creek bed. The air grew cooler there, the scent of water faint but present. When he reached the bend, he saw it, a horse lying on its side, struggling, and beside it, a woman half buried under a fallen wooden beam. Her dress was torn, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, her hat lost somewhere in the dust. Jacob dismounted and rushed toward her. "Ma'am," he called, kneeling beside her. "Don't move. You're hurt." She looked up, her eyes clouded with pain. "It's my leg. It's trapped. Please help me." Jacob examined the beam. It was heavy, part of a broken wagon axle. He planted his boots in the dirt, braced his arms, and pushed with everything he had. The beam barely budged. "Push harder. Right there," she cried, her voice cracking. Gritting his teeth, Jacob gave one final heave, his muscles trembling, and the beam rolled off her leg with a thud. The woman gasped, clutching her thigh, and Jacob's heart sank when he saw the dark stain spreading across her skirt. It wasn't just bruising. She'd been shot. He ripped his bandana off and wrapped it tightly around the wound, tying it just above the knee to slow the bleeding. "You've been shot," he said quietly. "Who did this to you?" She struggled to breathe, her lips trembling. "Outlaws," she whispered. "3 of them. They robbed the stagecoach, shot me when I tried to run." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Stagecoach robberies," he muttered under his breath. "That's the 3rd one this month." He glanced around the area. No sign of movement, no footprints but hers and the horses. He needed to get her out of there before those men came back. "You're lucky I found you," he said. "You'll be safe at my ranch." She tried to protest, but he lifted her carefully into his arms, ignoring her weak attempts to resist. Her body was light, fragile, but there was strength in the way she clutched a small leather satchel close to her chest. He noticed the satchel had a clasp shaped like an eagle. Expensive, not something a simple traveler would carry. As Jacob rode toward his ranch, the woman's head rested weakly against his shoulder. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words he couldn't make out. When the house came into view, a lone wooden structure standing brave against the wilderness, Jacob felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was home. He carried her inside, laid her on the couch near the fireplace, and fetched clean water from the basin. The flames danced softly as he cleaned her wound and replaced the bandage. When she finally stirred, Jacob spoke gently. "You're safe now. My name's Jacob Monroe. You're on my ranch." The woman's eyes flickered open, revealing a piercing shade of green that seemed out of place in the dusty Wild West. Clara, she said faintly. Clara Whitmore. Jacob gave a slight nod. You're lucky to be alive, Miss Whitmore. Whoever did this might still be out there. She winced as she tried to sit up, clutching the satchel protectively. You shouldn't have helped me, she whispered. Jacob frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Her gaze darted toward the window, fear lurking in her eyes. Because they'll come for me, and for anyone who stands in their way. Jacob stood silently for a moment, the firelight casting sharp lines across his face. Then let them come, he said finally. I've dealt with worse. He turned to the window, scanning the horizon. But deep down, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the woman wasn't telling him everything. The night passed slowly. Jacob sat by the table cleaning his rifle, his thoughts restless. The desert outside was silent, but every now and then the wind would howl through the cracks in the wood, making the house groan. Clara slept fitfully, murmuring things in her sleep. Names, fragments, something about documents and evidence. Jacob looked at the satchel beside her and felt his curiosity gnawing at him. Whatever was inside that bag was worth killing for. By dawn, Clara awoke to the smell of coffee and the soft creak of the front door opening. Jacob stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, watching the sun climb over the hills. It was peaceful, but he knew that peace in the Wild West never lasted long. He turned when he heard her voice behind him. You should leave me at the nearest town, she said. I'll find my way. Jacob shook his head. You're in no condition to travel. Whoever shot you might be close. You need rest. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand what you've done. Those men won't stop. Jacob's eyes met hers, steady, unyielding. Neither will I. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, two strangers bound by circumstance and danger. Outside, the wind rustled the tall grass, carrying with it the faint echo of distant thunder. But that wasn't thunder, Jacob realized. It was the sound of horses. He tensed, stepping off the porch and squinting into the distance. 3 riders were moving fast across the plains, dust rising behind them like a storm. His heart pounded as he turned to Clara, who had gone pale. It's them, she whispered, clutching the satchel. Jacob cocked his rifle, his expression turning cold as iron. Then they picked the wrong ranch to come after. The distant figures grew larger, clearer. Rough men with bandanas over their faces, rifles strapped to their saddles. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for Jacob's arm. If they find me here, they'll kill you too. Jacob glanced at her, calm but firm. They can try. The approaching riders slowed as they reached the gate. One of them shouted, his voice thick with arrogance. We're looking for a lady, Cowboy. Tall, brown hair carries something that don't belong to her. Jacob stood his ground, rifle aimed but steady. Ain't seen anyone, he replied coolly. The outlaw laughed. Mind if we take a look around? Jacob's grip tightened. You step on my land, you answer to me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The wind howled, carrying the taste of gunpowder that hadn't yet been fired. And in that moment, Jacob knew the quiet life he once had was over. Whatever secret Clara Whitmore carried had brought death to his doorstep. And before the sun set, blood would be spilled on this land again. The silence before the gunfire was heavier than steel. Jacob Monroe stood firm in the open doorway of his ranch, his rifle raised, his boots planted in the dust. The 3 outlaws sat on their horses just beyond the gate, their faces hidden behind dirty bandanas. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his jaw, tilted his hat back with the barrel of his revolver and spat into the dirt. You sure about that, Cowboy? He sneered. 'Cause the lady we're looking for ain't got many friends left. And you don't look like the kind of man who can afford to make enemies. Jacob's eyes didn't waver. I said, you ain't got business here. Right on. The outlaw's smirk widened. Tell you what, how about I come in and check for myself? He nudged his horse forward, slow and deliberate. Behind him, his men followed suit, fingers twitching near their triggers. Clara, still inside the house, clutched her satchel to her chest, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see Jacob, unmoving, defiant. a lone figure between her and death. The leader's horse crossed the boundary of the gate. That was all Jacob needed. One breath, one heartbeat, one pull of the trigger. The crack of the rifle split the morning silence, and the outlaw was thrown backward off his horse, blood misting the air. For a second, the world froze. Then chaos erupted. The two remaining riders shouted curses and drew their guns, firing wildly toward the house. Jacob dove behind the water trough, returning fire with steady precision. Bullets kicked up dirt and splintered wood around him. "Clara, get down!" he shouted. She dropped to the floor just as a bullet shattered the window above her head. The air filled with smoke, dust, and the smell of gunpowder. Jacob reloaded, popped up from cover, and fired twice more. One outlaw's horse reared up, screaming, throwing its rider to the ground. The man tried to crawl for his gun, but Jacob's next shot caught him square in the chest. He went still. The last outlaw panicked, yanking on his reins. His horse bolted, kicking up a storm of dust as they vanished into the distance. The only sound left was the crackle of the fire and the ragged breathing of the living. Jacob rose slowly, rifle still raised. "You can come out," he called to Clara. She stood shakily, her face pale as she stared at the dead men lying in the dirt. You killed them?" she whispered. Jacob's voice was steady but cold. "They'd have done the same to me. And to you." He kicked one of the guns away and crouched beside the fallen leader. Inside the man's coat he found a silver badge, not of law but of allegiance. A carved serpent wrapped around a pistol etched in steel. He'd seen that mark before. Smugglers, arms dealers, the kind who made their fortune off war and blood. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for her satchel. "That's their symbol," she said softly. "They're part of a smuggling ring, selling stolen weapons to Mexico. I was sent to stop them." Jacob looked up sharply. "You? Sent?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm a Pinkerton agent. Clara Whitmore isn't my real name. I was undercover on the stagecoach, tracking one of their couriers. But they found out who I was. They killed everyone, the driver, the guards, and left me for dead." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, the weight of her words sinking in. "So that's what's in that bag," he said. "Evidence," Clara nodded. "Documents, ledgers, coded messages, everything that could bring them down. But now they'll come after anyone who knows." Jacob took a deep breath, staring at the horizon. "Then they'll be back, and we'll be ready." The next few days turned into a battle of preparation. Jacob reinforced the doors, fixed the broken windows, and built barricades around the property. He set traps near the fence lines and posted lanterns around the barn. Clara, though still weak, insisted on helping. Jacob taught her how to shoot, how to steady her aim, how to keep her hands from trembling. She was quick to learn, sharper than most men he'd met. Beneath her calm voice and wounded body, there was a fire he couldn't ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in crimson hues, Clara stood on the porch with Jacob, her bandaged leg resting on a stool. The air was quiet, the kind of calm that always came before a storm. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," she said softly. "They'll kill you for helping me." Jacob glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You needed help. That's all I needed to know." Clara looked away, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "You risked your life for a stranger." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe I was tired of looking the other way." The following night the storm returned, not of weather, but of men. The sound of hooves thundered again, louder this time. Jacob's traps went off, a flash of gunfire, the distant scream of a horse. "They're here," Clara whispered, grabbing her revolver. Jacob took his position by the door, his heart pounding like a drum. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the ranch. Bullets slammed into the walls. Jacob fired back, methodical, unshaken. Clara crouched beside the window, returning fire despite the pain in her leg. The attackers circled the house, shouting threats, trying to flush them out. But Jacob had planned for this. The barn lanterns he'd set exploded when shot, creating walls of fire that lit up the night like hell itself. When the smoke cleared, 2 outlaws lay dead in the dirt, another wounded and crawling. Jacob stepped out, gun aimed. "Tell your boss it's over," he said coldly. The man spat blood. "You don't know who you're messing with." Jacob pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed, then silence. The last one alive turned tail and fled into the dark, never to return. By dawn, the ranch was quiet again. The fires had died, leaving only smoke curling into the pale morning sky. Clara stood beside Jacob, her face streaked with soot and tears. "It's over," she whispered. Jacob nodded slowly. "For now," she handed him the satchel. "The Pinkertons will want this. I can send for them from town." He looked at the bag, then at her. "You're not staying?" Clara hesitated, her eyes softening. "I can't. There's more work to be done. More men like them out there." Jacob's gaze lingered on her, his voice low. "Then you'll always have a home here if you ever need one." For the first time, Clara smiled, faint but real. "Careful, Mr. Monroe, you make it sound like you care." He smirked. "Maybe I do." When the Pinkerton carriage arrived 3 days later, Jacob helped her aboard. She looked back one last time at the ranch. The fences, the open sky, the man who'd saved her life. "You'll be all right here?" she asked. Jacob tipped his hat. "Been all right before. Will be again." As the carriage rolled away, dust rising behind it, Jacob watched until it disappeared beyond the hills. The wind blew softly across the plains, carrying the scent of smoke and sage. He turned toward the horizon, his rifle slung across his shoulder, and whispered to himself, "Push harder." Right there. It was what she'd said the first moment they'd met. A reminder that sometimes, even in a land built on violence, a man could still find something worth saving. And somewhere on the long road east, Clara Whitmore, or whatever her real name was, held her satchel tight and smiled at the thought of a quiet ranch in Texas, and a man who had stood his ground when no one else would.